مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. كما سبق أن ناقشنا في هذا البرنامج على مدى أسابيع عديدة عادة أمريكا للحرب في الشرق الأوسط مجددا. هذا الأسبوع في برنامج داخل واشنطن سنناقش الجوانب غير العسكرية من سياستنا الخارجية خاصة في الشرق الأوسط. ضيفنا هو رئيس معهد الولايات المتحدة للسلام بالنابع السفير السابق ويليام تايلور. Welcome back to Dakhil, Washington. I'm sitting here with Ambassador William Taylor to talk about all the non-military aspects of American foreign policy. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So, Ambassador, we are now involved in what some would count as our fourth Middle Eastern conflict in just 30 years, at least 3 in Iraq and then Afghanistan. But yet there's so much more to what America does abroad than just shoot and bombs and planes. What would you say are the most important non-military tools in our toolbox of foreign policy?
I would say diplomacy is a very important tool. Just looking at Iraq right now. Our work in Baghdad to help the government there form a coherent, inclusive government that represents all Iraqis, that's an important role for the international community to support the government in Baghdad. If the government in Baghdad is able to reach out to all Iraqis and bring in the Sunnis and deal with have the Kurds as part of this government and really have the support of all the people, then the military part, which is the other part we're not talking about here today, but then the military part has a chance. Without that political element, without that diplomatic element that we can do in Baghdad and around the country, the military is going to have a much harder time.
So what are the means of leverage? What are the tools that one uses to reach that goal?
The tools that one uses are varied. Just sticking with Iraq for a moment, we used to have a lot of leverage. We had a lot of leverage because we had a lot of soldiers in Iraq. And that gave our diplomats, interestingly enough, I used to work for one. I used to work for Ambassador John Negroponte. And he worked very closely with General Casey at the time and with General Petraeus, who was also on the staff. So that military angle, that military capability, that military presence in Baghdad and across the country gave Ambassador Negroponte the ability to go in to the government in Baghdad, the Iraqi government, and make suggestions and have discussions and encourage an inclusive government at that time as well. That leverage is down now, we'll be frank. We don't have a lot of soldiers. We have some more soldiers now than we had a couple of months ago. Now we're starting to bring some of the military elements back. And that will help stabilize things, I believe. But we don't have the massive numbers of troops that we used to have in there when I was in Baghdad 8 or 10 years ago.
And what about countries where we don't have we never have and probably never will have a significant military presence, but we have interests that we want to advance?
Let's take a good example of that, Tunisia today. We have no military there. We may have an army colonel in the embassy, but we don't have a military presence in Tunis. But we have a major role to play in Tunisia. Tunisia, as we all know, is is the success in the Arab Spring, in the Arab revolutions, in the Arab awakening. Tunisia recently had a very successful election, and Tunisia should be very proud of that. And they should be very proud of, again, the inclusive nature of that government. Here we have a moderate Islamist party who was in a coalition with 2 secular parties earlier. Here we have that moderate Islamist party turning over the government to a technocratic government leading up to these elections. Here we have a moderate Islamist party who has said, yes, we lost that election. The secular party, Nida Tunis in this case, won more votes. And so this moderate Islamist party said, this is the way it's supposed to work. This is the way elections are supposed to be. The people of Tunisia decide, and we recognize the legitimacy that we, the international community, and we, the Americans, have a responsibility and an opportunity to support that kind of good governance, that kind of democratic action in Tunisia. And we have a responsibility to support it and to help it economically, to help it politically, to help it succeed. I mean, if we can help Tunisia succeed, this will be great for the whole region. The whole region then sees there is a Muslim country, there's an Arabic country that is a democracy. It's a real democracy. It can be done, and the Tunisians are demonstrating that. But it's up to the international community, economically, politically, diplomatically, to support what's going on in Tunisia.
Now, every country does some things better than other things, whether it's economic assistance and development or promoting educational reform or what would you say, put aside the military again, what would you say we do really well?
One thing I think we do very well is exchange programs with students. The good thing about exchange programs is that it enables young people in Tunisia, in Egypt, used to be in Russia, they've now turned us down. In some of these countries, it enables those young people to come to the United States and attend college, attend university for a year or 4, get a degree, live with Americans. One of our best programs, I used to coordinate international assistance to the former Soviet Union. I, for my sins, have also coordinated assistance to Iraq, to the Arab Spring countries. So I've seen a lot of different programs, a lot of different assistance programs that the Americans have done. And we've done some well, we've done some not so well. But the ones I think that were the most successful are these exchange programs. And the best one was high school exchanges. The best one, in my view, is when we selected a small number of the applicants to come to, from a country, let's just say Ukraine. I served in Ukraine.
You served as ambassador.
I served in Ukraine, and when we would put out the opportunity for young Ukrainians to apply for this program, to spend a year in the United States, living with American families, going to high school with American kids, going to synagogues, going to the mosque, going to church, going to the movies, living with American families was a life-changing experience for these young Ukrainians. And they went back to Ukraine with great experiences, and they have made great contributions in non-governmental organizations, in politics, but they also did a great thing while they were in the United States. They taught Americans about Ukraine. And that's a very valuable thing for both sides. So in answer to your question, I would say exchange programs are things that we do well.
I mean, you know my next question, of course, which is, to put it politely, where do we have certain challenges that we could improve upon?
Well asked. So we have challenges when we go into a country and we try to tell the citizens, the government, the non-governmental organizations how they should organize themselves. We don't do this well. No one can do this well. No one can tell another country, no country and no officials of one country can tell officials or citizens of another country how to organize themselves or how to organize their government or how to organize their economy. We can't do that very well. And we can't because we don't know enough about the country. The people who live there know the country. They know, in most cases, and almost all cases, the people who live there know what needs to be done. What we should be doing is helping them do that when it's consistent with what we're trying to promote. We're trying to promote democratic forms. If they want to adopt democracy, we should help them. If they don't, we have no business being there.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk more about the range of non-military tools in our diplomatic toolkit to advance American interests abroad. In just a moment. My guest today is William B. Taylor, Jr., acting president of the United States Institute of Peace. A successful and decorated diplomat, Ambassador Taylor served as special coordinator for Middle East transitions in the State Department, responsible for coordinating assistance to Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Syria. In his career, he served as the American ambassador to Ukraine, U.S. government representative to the Middle East Quartet, the first director of the Iraq Reconstruction Management Office, coordinator of international and U.S. assistance to Afghanistan, and coordinator of U.S. assistance to the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. All simple and easy jobs. As an infantry platoon leader and combat company commander in the U.S. Army, he served in Vietnam and Germany. Ambassador Taylor graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. So let's pick up on the discussion of democracy promotion, one of the most sensitive and difficult tasks that our diplomats do in various countries around the world. What have we learned from the Arab Spring experience of trying to promote democracy? Successful some places, less so elsewhere?
Less so elsewhere. Democracy promotion is a difficult challenge. We believe in it. The United States has had a successful democracy for over 200 years, and we do believe in the values that underlie a democratic system. We do believe that democratic forms of government are less likely to go to war with other countries who have democratic forms of government. So we think there is a real value in having democracies around the world. Not only is it good for us and for the international community, but it's good for people. It's good for Egyptians, it's good for Tunisians. The question is, how can we encourage democracy, a democratic governance, in places where the government is not eager to have it promoted? And there are some in the list of countries that you just gave that have governments that are not interested in having an inclusive, pluralistic, tolerant governance and population that is really involved in how they are governed, in choosing their own leaders. So when there's not the right environment for this, and we see this, frankly, let's be clear, we see it in Egypt, we see it in Russia. We used to do a lot of work on democracy promotion in Russia, and for a while there, it was working. And the Russians, coming out of years of Soviet rule, and before that, Tsarist rule, the Russians were taking to democracy, understood it, and they looked to us, they looked to the United States and to the Europeans, Western Europeans, as models, and for guidance, and for some training, and for experience in the country. So we brought Russians and Ukrainians and others to the United States to show how the Supreme Court worked, or how the Congress worked, or how elections run, and problems that we have. I mean, we were clear that democracy is not perfect, and we have problems and all these things. And so the Russians and Ukrainians and others learned from this, and they went back, and for a while, the Russians were adopting this, and they had a couple of good elections. Well, not so much right now. And in Russia, Mr. Putin is not so interested in having democratic elections. He's not so interested in having non-governmental organizations, civil society that is playing a big role in Russia. He's not so interested in having a free press. If he had a free press, he would not be able to say to his people, we are liberating Ukraine. A free press would be clear that the Russians are invading Ukraine and occupying Ukraine. But he's not interested in that. And that's the case in some countries that we're dealing with in the Middle East as well. So in those cases, we shouldn't work on democracy in those areas. There are ways to help Democrats in Egypt and in Russia, but it's not in Egypt and it's not in Russia. It is outside, and it is subtle. It has to be subtle.
So if you had a marginal dollar, or in this case, a marginal $10 million, and you wanted to to improve democratic life, human rights, civil society in a difficult country like the ones you're naming.
Right.
What would be your preferred way of spending it?
My preferred way of spending $10 billion, if I had a spare $10 billion, would be to bring as many young Egyptians to United States universities, to keep on a theme that we talked about a moment ago, so that they can make their own judgments. Certainly they can take advantage of a very good education system. So the United States has a very good university system. And so offering scholarships to young Egyptians, men and women, from cities as well as rural areas, and particularly women and in particular people from rural areas that haven't had the opportunity to do this, but if we could offer scholarships to these young Egyptians without any ideological, political, even democratic goals. We're just talking about bringing them out so they can get an education. And Egyptians and Russians, even Mr. Putin and Mr. Sisi are in favor of education, I think. So that should be value neutral in some sense. They come in and they see how a democracy works, they go back. I think that's the most effective way to do it.
So now I can come back and ask, in your experience, how well resourced are the tools that we've been talking about, whether it's education or development assistance or whatever it is? Are we up to snuff in what we're spending in this area?
No, of course not. We're not up to snuff. In some countries, in some places, we have spent a lot of money. We spent some money in Russia. No more now because they're not interested in our assistance or our meddling. We spent a lot of money in Egypt. The United States has spent a lot of money, not just on the military. We've spent a lot of money on the Egyptian military, but we've also spent a lot of money on Egyptian education and health, water. We have put in more sewers and underwater treatment centers in Egypt than most Egyptians have any idea of. And that's because the Egyptian governments who were receiving this assistance from us were not much interested in telling the Egyptians that this is from the Americans. But they were happy to take it. They were happy to have the water treatment plants in place. So it is, in some places we have plenty of money, maybe more than we need, and some places we are well underfunded. Tunisia, we should be helping out much more. Ukraine, we should be helping out much more.
So let me ask you about a different topic for a moment. Preventive diplomacy, the crisis that doesn't happen. What would be a good example of Americans being ahead of the curve, preventing a crisis that didn't happen?
It's almost impossible to answer this question. Preventive diplomacy it happens, and we know it happens, but by definition, you don't see it. You don't see it. It didn't explode. It's the dog that didn't bark. You don't hear that dog because it's not barking. It's the same thing in preventive diplomacy. What you have to do, however, is work through embassies, and so embassies around the world, and let's just take embassies in Africa. There's a lot of simmering problems in Africa, whether it be health problems that we're seeing, whether it be education problems, developmental problems, poverty is extreme. These are all elements of crises, of conflicts. And we, not just the United States, and certainly not just the Institute of Peace, which we try to do preventive work, but the international community more broadly has to help countries deal with those problems. Those problems can end up in violence, and preventing that violence through education, through healthcare, through a governance system in each of these countries that responds to the needs of citizens. That's preventive diplomacy.
Now, I'm glad you threw in this phrase, international community, because I did want to ask you, how well do we coordinate? Do we play well together with other countries and with international organizations?
I think we do, actually. It's not obvious in many cases. It's not interesting in many cases. But the United States, in particular in countries where the work is actually going on. So in Ukraine, for example, there was a lot of coordination among the ambassadors there. There's a lot of coordination among the Western assistance agencies. In Egypt, we did the same thing, where the Europeans and the Americans decided early on, several years ago, that we were going to join forces and really encourage the Egyptians to sign up with the International Monetary Fund. And we coordinated our policies with the Europeans. And I had spent a lot of time with my European colleagues discussing how we could best help the Egyptians. And so we do that. It's not very sexy or interesting or obvious, but we do that. We do that in most, and it happens mainly in the capitals where we're working.
Okay, Ambassador Taylor, this is an often overlooked topic. I think we could go on for quite a while. It's a fascinating topic, and thank you very much for joining us here on Dakhil, Washington.
Glad to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول أثر انتخاباتنا على السياسة الأمريكية في الشرق الأوسط، أرجو أن تتصلوا بي مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@elkhura.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.